To understand that hum, we have to go back to rooms where the lights never fully turned on, and the ocean spoke in numbers. In the 1970s and 1980s, the Navy's SOSUS hydrophone arrays stretched like a wire frame under the Atlantic and Pacific. Officially, they listened for Soviet submarines. Unofficially, they heard everything. And somewhere in those tapes, you get the first hints of walls under silt. A retired analyst described the pattern without handing over the clearance ghosts. It wasn't whale song. It wasn't ice. He tapped his desk with 2 fingers, evenly spaced. Regular spacings. Returns that shouldn't stack so clean on abyssal flats. On paper, abyssal plains scatter sound like gravel. You don't get crisp echoes unless something flat and firm is giving your ping a face to bounce from. Yet, late shift technicians started noting repeat intervals. Distances that kept coming back, like pillars holding up a roof you couldn't see. What nobody knew at the time was how fast those notes got walled off. Classification tags appeared on anomaly sheets that had lived in unclassified bays for years. Data that used to route to oceanography groups detoured into a small, tight compartment inside ONI. People with PhDs in sediment dynamics found their access trimmed, their requests pending indefinitely. Meanwhile, the operators kept listening, and the returns kept repeating. Here's where the map starts to draw itself. Across multiple ocean basins, under trenches that didn't share geology, analysts found grids that rhymed, repeating cell sizes, corridors that behaved like long, narrow canyons where no canyon should exist. A tech at Keflavik logged one series, flagged it for follow-up, and 2 days later he was reassigned to a training unit on land. Another in Guam saw near-identical spacings months apart, different bearings, same cadence in the low bands. He joked to a friend that the ocean had scaffolding. The friend told him to stop saying that out loud. While that was happening in New York, because yes, some of those tapes moved through civilian labs on the way to grants, oceanographers noticed absences. Research proposals referencing subabyssal reflectors came back gutted, or came back with a polite postscript. Please coordinate with naval liaisons, standard with legacy SOSUS data. A linguist turned signal analyst ran a naive periodicity test on an unlabeled SOSUS reel and circled a cluster with a pencil. In the margin he wrote, "Not random." The pencil mark outlived his clearance. The signatures didn't scream. They whispered and they repeated. You'd get a strong return, then weaker, then none, then a strong one at a precise interval like a support spacing. Stack enough runs, and a lattice appeared in negative space. It didn't match fault scarps, sand waves, or any known sedimentary features. And the timing, this is important, the timing on certain low-frequency thumps lined up with what later teams would call cycle windows, quiet periods where other noise dialed down. It's as if something down there made its own acoustic night to move. In 1997, the Bloop arrived like a prank the ocean played on microphones. Headlines loved the monster angle. NOAA later attributed it to icequakes. But inside compartments, engineers scratched differences into yellow pads. A broadband roar, sure, but seeded with intervals that looked clocked. When later reanalyses matched those seeds to start-stop. Marks in old SOSUS grids, a theory hardened that nobody wanted to write down. The Bloop wasn't a thing calling. It was a packet sent, coordination across distance, flipping switches you couldn't see from the surface. Unknown to them, across town, a young postdoc tried to publish a decorative paper on structured abyssal reflectors, using anonymized hydrophone echoes. His advisor got a visit. The draft never made peer review. He moved to software. Years later, over coffee, he said he'd measured distances between reflectors like he was measuring beams in a warehouse. He laughed when he said it, but he didn't sound amused. This was the moment everything changed. Someone laid those legacy grids over modern bathymetry and saw the same spacing under different trenches. The Pacific, the Southern Ocean, the Indian. Not carbon copies, but family resemblances. Production cells, corridors, junctions. Not tunnels, not caves, cavities with edges too consistent to blame on the slow hand of geology. And nested in the low hum, a metronome no storm could keep for that long. What they didn't know then, what the whistleblower would feel in his bones years later, was that the hum marked a schedule. The arrays heard it first. ONI boxed it in. And the maps they buried weren't just cartography. They were floor plans. The silencing pattern. Silence didn't arrive like a threat. It came dressed as safety. 3 divers who'd been briefed on oxygen artifacts in separate contracts started losing things that keep you employable. One had his saturation cert flagged for review. Another saw his medicals expire mid-project. The third just stopped getting calls. 2 of them vanished from the industry within a year. Nobody wrote punishment in an email. They wrote prudence, fitness, compliance. Same result. The whistleblower's team felt the shift after the tender visit. Meetings moved off calendars. The distribution on their logs narrowed to initials they didn't recognize. The word grid vanished from their own notes, replaced by substrate irregularities, then by nothing. When they pushed, a coordinator smiled through clenched teeth and said, "Let's focus on deliverables." The hum was now an HR problem. At home, lives got smaller. One diver's spouse started finding slit envelopes in the mailbox. Opened cleanly, resealed poorly. Phone calls developed a metallic undertone, a tiny carrier that rode your voice like a second shadow. She asked her husband what he'd signed. He said, "An NDA." She said, "I didn't." They stopped speaking near the kitchen window. Meanwhile, inboxes filled with safety bulletins that sounded helpful until you read the footnotes. New checklists discouraged personal instruments. No pocket compasses, no private audio recorders, no unapproved sensors. Another bulletin advised avoiding zones of anomalous oxygenation until risk characterization concluded. Those zones mapped neatly onto the very boxes the tender had declared off limits. They weren't stopping the work. They were fencing the questions. What nobody knew at the time were the side channels. We've seen the red lines. Internal emails used oxygen artifacts as a phrase to divert incident chatter into legal silos. The playbook was clean. Invoke equipment calibration, recommend rest, rotate personnel, and if necessary, terminate for cause without citing the cause. It didn't silence everyone. It thinned the herd to people who'd already learned to look away. Get this, one contractor tried to raise the hum in a safety stand-down. He didn't say grid. He said, low-frequency modulation affecting concentration. 2 days later, an occupational health memo circulated about infrasound stress responses and self-care strategies. The hum was now a wellness issue. He got a voucher for a mindfulness app. He didn't get his clearance renewal. The whistleblower tells a smaller story that won't leave him. He came home early from a job that ended with no debrief. A neighbor, a postal clerk, mentioned a man in a suit asking if their building had a parcel room. The clerk said, "We don't." The man left without giving a name. That night the whistleblower found his dive slate, kept in a locked trunk, slid a few inches off-center. No prints, no damage. Just touched, like a fingertip on a bruise. Across the industry, conversations retreated into cars with engines running or onto bleachers at kids' games where chatter sounded like background. A veteran saturation supervisor drew a diagram on a napkin, a rectangle for a trench, small ticks for intervals, and then tore it into strips and flushed them, one by one, between beers. He said, "I like my lungs. I like my license." The napkin still made a map on the way down. While that was happening in New York, a university partner received a polite request to postpone a symposium session on non-photic oxygen anomalies. The reason given: potential overlap with classified environmental baselines. A second email suggested reframing under electrochemical contexts, citing the Clarion-Clipperton Geobattery paper as a helpful narrative. The phrase helpful narrative did more harm than a subpoena. It told scientists what to say without saying don't. The whistleblower's own warnings got specific, mentioned dark oxygen, lose your seat in the bell. He asked flat, "On whose authority?" The answer came soft, the compartment. They didn't say ONI. They didn't have to. A rider with a blank badge started showing up on crew boats, checking manifests against NDAs, collecting SD cards for central synthesis. He was always courteous. He always left with copies you couldn't audit. Stakes narrowed to household budgets and scar tissue. Divers with years in cold iron started passing on trips that brushed the flagged coordinates. A wife told her husband, "We can sell the truck." He nodded and stared at a calendar that had fewer red blocks every month. Another diver, younger, took the jobs and came back with headaches he called hangovers. He didn't drink. Silence only works until biology slips through the door. The ocean had its own way of keeping records, and the next hint didn't come from a memo. It came from a swab the whistleblower shouldn't have taken, reacting to a tone nobody was supposed to hear. Biological clues that don't fit. He wasn't supposed to bring anything home. But the swab rode out of the bell stuck inside a hollow on his torque wrench handle, wrapped in a glove finger, sealed with a strip of electrical tape. It looked like gray smear, silt, maybe a biofilm you'd scrub off with a toothbrush. He told himself it was a souvenir for his nerves. He knew it was evidence. His friend ran a small lab behind a state school's main hall. 2 rooms, a benchtop spectrometer, and a freezer that iced up in winter. They met late, lights half off, coffee stale in a chipped mug. The friend spread the swab onto a watch glass and said, "You're an idiot." Then he added deionized water, slid a probe in, and waited for noise. At 2 degrees Celsius, in a tray dark as a closet, dissolved oxygen began to rise. Not a whisper, a slope you could draw a ruler along. He turned the lamp on, off, on again. No change. "This isn't photosynthesis," he said. "Not at this temp, not in this dark." He brought up the Nature Geoscience paper on his phone. The one about polymetallic nodules in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone acting like geobatteries near 0.95 volts. "Electrolysis fits the curve," he muttered. "But where's the potential coming from in a scrap on my bench?" They started prodding. A dab stained with a weak redox dye shifted hue near what looked like a membrane. Under the scope, the film wasn't smooth. It was riddled with apertures too regular to be shrug-off slime, nanoporous, repeating distances like a template had told the pores where to grow. The polymer signature he pulled from a quick FTIR run didn't map to the usual suspects. Not PTFE, not PEAK, not off-the-shelf marine sealants. The peaks landed between families. He frowned. Either a blend I've never seen or something you can't buy. Meanwhile, the oxygen trace kept stepping up in quiet, then easing when air currents moved across the tray. He slid a thin electrode pair near the film, chased microvolts, and grinned without humor. "There's a bias here. Not much, but something's acting like a battery." What nobody knew at the time was how the tone would wake it up. The whistleblower had recorded minutes of the trench hum on a pocket device, buried under static and carrier hiss. The lab friend fed a clean sample into a speaker the size of a paperback, barely audible, tuned to the band they'd circled on the spectrogram. The room felt like it swallowed. The lights didn't dim, but everyone felt smaller. On the meter, dissolved oxygen climbed faster. He flipped the tone off. The slope softened. Back on. It steepened. "You're kidding me," the friend said, though he knew it wasn't a joke. "It responds to an acoustic band." Get this, when he swept harmonics, not all tones hit. A narrow window nudged the curve, and a cluster, mathematically related to that low trench cadence, pushed it hardest. He jotted hum harmonics on a pad and drew arrows to production rate. Later, they'd learn an independent acoustician could recreate the response with a synthetic set tuned to the same family. That night, they just watched the line climb. A microstory lives in that hour. The building's HVAC thunked off. The lab went still. The friend leaned close to read a tiny bubble chain sliding off the film. He whispered, "This thing breathes when it hears the right song." The whistleblower laughed once, a dry sound. The plug strip under the bench clicked, and the fluorescent over the sink flickered, as if someone had kicked a transformer far away. He checked the door. Empty hall. When he turned back, the meter had ticked higher than any control run they'd done. He bagged a corner of the film with tweezers for follow-up. The friend said, "Don't take it." He took it anyway. They froze the rest in labeled tubes, date, time, coordinates etched into cap tops with a scribe. They agreed to sleep and start clean at dawn. Morning didn't arrive the way they'd planned. 2 men in polite suits stood by the autoclave when the friend unlocked the door. Their badges said federal, but not which corner. "We're here about a sample integrity issue," one said. He knew the tone of practiced concern. In the cold room, the upright freezer's light worked. The compressor hummed. Every tube inside was warm to the touch. A paper towel pinned to the shelf read "Freezer failure." In block letters the friend didn't write. They didn't accuse. They asked for process notes, for calibration logs, for copies of any data, to ensure no hazard left the premises. The friend handed over duplicates that weren't full. The whistleblower watched the man's eyes fall on the empty slot where the bagged corner had sat. The man didn't blink. He just folded the towel and put it in his pocket like trash. That night, in a different room, the acoustician they'd called as a sanity check spun up a mottled tone and hit play. The bagged fragment in a fresh tray reacted the same way, oxygen rising as if obeying a shift whistle. The acoustician didn't ask for money. He asked for copies and a number to reach them. If anyone else ever brings you a hum that clean. Open loops started stacking. The tone that drove production matched the trench hum's harmonic family. The polymer looked engineered, but the supplier trails ended in dead air. The oxygen spike didn't care about light, it cared about schedule. Follow the tone, the acoustician said, and you'll find the walls. And the whistleblower thought, if a scrap on a bench can answer, how big is the rest of it answering in the dark? The lattice under silt. Follow the tone, the acoustician said, and you'll find the walls. So they went back to where the hum lived. Not on a contract, not under a flag, quiet, late, with a loaned ROV that wouldn't show up on the logs of people who counted. The sea was a slate you didn't want to write on. They lowered the package until the wire sang, and the camera found nothing but gray. Then orientation snapped into place. The first hint wasn't visual. It was the compass in the control van drifting 3 degrees, then 6, then back, as if someone nudged north with a magnet. Inside the camera, a pollen of silt floated past, turned, and slipped along an edge that wasn't there until it was. An impossibly straight line of darker gray where sediment thinned. The pilot panned. Another line intersected it at 60 degrees. Hexed angles don't belong to dunes or drifts. They belong to plans. He brought the arm down like a hand feeling for a light switch in the dark. The claw kissed a ridge buried under millimeters of fluff. The van filled with a sound like a whispering soda. Bubbles rose in tight, perfect beads that jumped from the metal as if it repelled their touch. The dissolved oxygen probe chirped. Not noise. A step. Cold water breathed pure into black. They froze because the ocean doesn't do that here. Steel blooms rust. Plastics film over. Down at 4,000 meters, corrosion eats slowly, but it always eats. Yet the strut beneath the silt looked new. The joints at its nodes were crisp. No pitting, no dulling. The pilot scraped with the claw and revealed a panel that caught light like a graphite skin. He said very softly, "That's not any alloy I know." While that was happening in New York, a materials friend answered a midnight text with a list of marine-grade signatures. Super duplex, titanium alloys, nickel-copper mixes. The ROV Spectro head, crude but honest, red backs that didn't fit those bins. Peaks tucked where you'd expect a composite, not a metal. A response that suggested layered conductors and something polymeric. The pilot tagged the strip, unknown stack. Meanwhile, the magnetic anomalies lined up like hallways. The compass behaved inside narrow corridors and went tipsy the moment it crossed a seam. He flew the ROV along the drift and found the pattern repeating. Beam, node, beam, space, always the same distance. He measured between joints and wrote down a number that didn't feel geologic. It felt chosen. 31 meters and change, again and again, until a silt wave masked the next. Sediment did something else no one expected. It didn't like the surfaces. Grains that fell toward the beam slowed, turned, and slid off, as if pushed back by a skin of charge. Electrostatic fields at depth aren't supposed to last. Seawater bleeds them away. But the way the fines avoided those edges said the lattice was alive, even if barely, holding a potential that whispered to dust. He eased the claw over a junction and pressed. Another hiss of microbubbles zipped for the vanishing light. They weren't random. They rose from tiny pores arranged in rings along the node. Production cells. That was the word the whistleblower wrote on his slate in. The van, half without thinking. Cells in a row. Chambers connected by channels you couldn't see until you looked for what wasn't there. The gaps cleaned by a field, the lines where compasses lost their nerve. Get this, their map from that night doesn't look like a map. It looks like a heartbeat drawn into geometry. Composed corridors that matched the hum's rise times. Narrow rooms, long halls, each interval echoing a period they'd pulled off the trench audio. When the tone fell quiet, the field softened. Silt tried to land and failed less. When the tone returned, the air, oxygen really, poured faster from the pores and drifted up like lace. They pushed along the grid's edge and found a seam that wasn't a seam until it moved. A panel dilated, just a hair, and inside the cut, membranes pulsed slow as sleep. The camera had to fight to keep contrast because the light went weird, like the membranes 8 photons sideways. Between pulses, the meter climbed another notch. The pilot swore he felt pressure change through the feedback line, a hand on the van's shoulder from 1,000 atmospheres away. He tried to slip the claw inside. The panel narrowed, polite but final. He backed off and traced the edge instead, counting rivulets you wouldn't assign to nature. Channels bored laterally into the silt, piping whatever the heavy product was into deeper shafts. Mining cover stories can explain holes. They can't explain lateral pipelines that cross fault lines like they were drawn with a ruler underground. Procurement trails went dark the way they always do when something matters. Places that should have sold these materials didn't list them. Shipments that should have shown destinations ended near trenches with no registrations. Fronts waved mining permits in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, pointed to environmental baselines, and smiled for cameras while their cables vanished over continental edges into water this cold. They marked one more thing: joints that could flex without breaking and beams that rang faintly when the tone hit a certain second harmonic. The lattice wasn't static scaffolding. It sang back when sung to. If not ours, whose? And who's guarding it? The pilot killed the lights and let the van sit in the silent glow. The hum, patient as a train schedule, swelled again, and somewhere beyond the grid, something moved that didn't want to be seen yet. The guardians in the dark. They felt it first, the pressure shift you don't log because it sounds superstitious. The van's walls seemed to lean in by a hair, the way a theater goes quiet before a curtain lifts. The pilot feathered thrusters. The compass corrected. The hum steadied into that low-band cadence they'd learned to respect. And then in the far edge of the camera, the silt moved like a lens being slid across glass. He said, "Hold," and nobody breathed. The smear thickened, then cleared, and something darker than the dark behind it slid uphill without stirring the plume it passed through. No running lights. No cavitation trail. Just a contour that bent the silt's flow around it, as if it wore the ocean instead of pushing it. It paused, angle on, as if presenting a smaller radar face to the ROV, then rose, straight up, quick enough to make the van crew grab seat rails, even though they weren't moving. USO, the acoustician said on the speaker, half a joke, half a diagnosis. Unidentified submerged object. The word sat there like a dare. They followed as far as the tether let them. The object didn't bolt. It made neat vertical hops, 15 meters, pause, 15 more, like it was pacing a grid stacked in layers. Each stop synced to a trough in the trench tone, the way you'd cross a street on green. At one pause, it rotated with a mechanical elegance that unstitched everyone's nerve. A face, no, not a face, a roundness, glinted where nothing reflective should be. The camera tried to focus and failed, as if the shape had edges only when it wanted to. While that was happening, the hull sensors ticked colder. The water around the ROV dipped a fraction of a degree, enough to register, not enough to belong to a seep. Cold where it should be warm said active cooling, or something that didn't burn heat to move. The pilot eased closer. The object dimmed, not visually but sonically. Its return on their narrow beam ping winked off, then reappeared 2 body lengths downslope, same heading, same unhurried pace. The radio grew its own insects. Clicks rode the carrier, spaced like metronomes you could miss if you weren't counting. The acoustician counted. "They're gating with the hum," he said, pen tapping. In the headset, a second voice said, "Copy." Nobody had keyed a mic. The pilot frowned and checked squelch. Clean. The clicks kept time anyway. Get this, a second shape entered from the left, gliding along a different corridor, perpendicular to the first object's track. It hit the intersection, stopped, and waited. The first object reached the cross, angled a few degrees, and slipped through. No standoff, no dance. Traffic control. The van's air went thin. If anything was hunting them, it would close. This looked like deconfliction, as if they were pedestrians on someone else's sidewalk. The whistleblower leaned toward the screen and saw a tear in the silt halo near the second object, an eddy curling against nothing visible. "Lens," he said before he could stop himself. He meant the way light bends when it passes a lens. This wasn't light. It was motion. The silt arced as if guided by a surface that didn't want to exist until it had to. He remembered a rumor from carrier decks and mess tables. Nimitz-era logs where craft accelerated off gimbal without a plume. Those were in air. This was in water, and the moves felt like cousins. He lifted his hand to cue the pilot, then felt his glove squeeze against skin, pressure in his palm with no source. It wasn't pain. It was presence, like walking through a doorway where the temperature changes and your body notices before your mind does. The ROV's pressure transducer barely twitched. The human sensor, the one you carry in your joints, filed a louder report. He whispered, "It's closer than the camera says." Meanwhile, the hum's subharmonics shifted. 2 quick pulses between the longs, like a scheduler dropping an alert. The clicks in the headsets slid a hair faster. The second object tilted, and the camera got a cleaner look at something that wasn't a hull so much as a field boundary. The silt didn't smear across it. It parted and flowed along it like rain down a pane. The object's outline pulsed once, a ripple moving nose to tail, and the cold ticked another 1/10 of a degree. The pilot tested them with a pencil beam sonar ping. The return should have lit a neat dot. It blinked, vanished, and came back from a different patch of the same object. as if the surface decided where it wanted to be hit. He killed the ping and swore softly. The acoustician wrote, "Active reflectivity management," then underlined it twice. Across the tether, a third contact grazed the map, small and fast, slipping from lower left to upper right like a moth near a lamp. The van chased and lost it. The click cadence rose to match the trench tone's crest, then flattened. In the lull, the first two objects settled into a holding pattern at the grid edge, equidistant from the ROV, equidistant from each other. Not a pincer, a perimeter. Here's where a microstory swerved them. The whistleblower cued the ROV arm to brush the strut again, just enough to make those fine oxygen beads whisper upward. The nearest object twitched, not toward them, away 2 meters, then stop. The click stuttered, corrected, and resumed on time with the hum. If the Lattice exhaled, the Guardians gave it space. That was the rule. Schedule, the acoustician said. They're on a schedule. They tested it once more. Tone playback through the van's transducer, barely a breath in that low band. The Lattice pores brightened with bubbles on cue. The Guardians drifted outward a touch, maintaining spacing as if they were keeping a safe zone clear for an unseen process. Radio carriers softened, clicks fell into a simpler pattern, and the headset, for a heartbeat, went clean. Then a different tone arrived, not theirs, the grid's second harmonic stepping up like a whistle you hear in your bones. Everything under Silt lit within itself, a glow the camera could feel more than see. The Guardians rotated to face downslope, as if acknowledging a train they couldn't stop and didn't need to. The pilot's hand hovered over thrusters he didn't touch. The schedule had the right of way, and they were guests. When it passed, the hum settled back to baseline. The cold softened, the silt unbent. The first object sank, slow as dusk, and faded into the trench night. The second followed, clicking lightly like knuckles on a desk before a meeting. The van crew let out a breath they pretended they hadn't been holding. The whistleblower wrote one sentence on his slate and underlined it. The tone wasn't just a heartbeat, it was a timetable, and the things that ran it were patient.